You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis, Norman Richmond, and joining us on the line, Dr. Gerald Horne, a regular on CKLN, a regular on many radio stations around I should say, the country and the world. And Dr. Horne, one of his latest books is, I Dare Say. The other is Revolting Capital Racism and Radicalism in Washington, D.C. We have he's going to be speaking, Dr. Horne is speaking in Leimert Park. That's in Los Angeles on February the 3rd. And I guess we wanted to get started by talking about the situation in Palestine. I guess that is one of the most, if not the most, burning question on the planet Earth. Would you agree with that?
Oh, undoubtedly. And just a footnote with regard to your mention of my coming to Los Angeles on February 3rd, you can find details either on my Facebook page or the kpfk.org website. It's a benefit for the Pacifica station in Los Angeles, KPFK. But in any event, back to Palestine, this is a tragedy that's unfolding. Rarely have we seen so many journalists that had been killed, apparently targeted by the Israeli authorities, because obviously they do not want reportage of the crimes that they are perpetrating. Rarely have we seen so many United Nations workers and staff that have been killed, because apparently the Israeli authorities do not want the United Nations to assist the Gazans so that the Israelis can carry out their diabolical scheme of making Gaza uninhabitable, which would then cause the residents to flee. Already we know that disease is spreading like wildfire through Gaza. The latest scheme is not only to drive the Gazans into the Sinai Desert, Egyptian territory, but there's been loose talk about airlifting Gazans into the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, this would be of a piece with the devious scheme of Rishi Sunak in London of deporting undocumented workers in Great Britain to Rwanda. Thus far, only litigation has stymied that plan. Apparently, the Rwandans are willing to go along with it because, of course, they will be compensated in their minds handsomely. We cannot rule out the DRC scheme because a moving force in the DRC economy is an Israeli billionaire by the name of Dan Gertler. And by the way, Mr. Gertler is heavily invested in the mineral wealth of Congo. And Dan Gertler also has 12 children, so we can expect his dynasty to continue indefinitely unless we're able to turn the tables. I should also say that the Israelis have also demonstrated that rare gift of being able to kill children. That's been one of the problems that they're facing right now in terms of accomplishing their objectives in Gaza. What I mean by that is that the Israeli Defense Force is rather adept and adroit at breaking the arms of Palestinian teenagers on the West Bank. But now they're dealing with battle-hardened forces in Gaza and are being pummeled as a direct result. Likewise, you see the Israeli authorities have been attacking hospitals because they would prefer to see Gazans die in the streets rather than be treated in hospitals. And the Israeli authorities have complained that they have been involved in fighting a seven front war. I think we spoke about that last week, if not the week before, with the most developed fronts being in Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Yemen. However, Yemen notwithstanding, and the latest news there is that Chinese ships are saying they will no longer sail into Israeli ports, at least not via the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. But the Yemenis, as Mr. Trump might say, have done a number on the Israelis because they are stymieing trade through the Suez Canal. They are stymieing trade through the Red Sea to the Suez Canal. They're forcing ships to either take the northern route from Asia through Russian territorial waters to Western Europe, or through trains rumbling from Eastern China all the way to Western Europe, or the long route around the Cape of Good Hope. It's not coincidental, perhaps, that the beneficiaries of what the Yemenis are doing happen to be leading members of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And in other words, Russia, China, South Africa being beneficiaries of what the Yemenis are doing. But what the scuttlebutt is, as of now, is that the Israelis would like to widen this conflict because they're not doing very well in Gaza. And as the late Pentagon chief Donald Rumsfeld once said, if you have a problem, the way to deal with it is to enlarge it, because that creates a new dynamic. The new dynamic being that if you widen the conflict into Iran, you might be able to drag in the United States, which is obviously in bed with the Zionist lobby, and therefore that would help to attain and accomplish a long-standing U.S. goal going back to the 1970s and the onset of the Iranian Revolution of overthrowing the Islamic Republic. This is obviously madness. Iran is not a country to trifle with. It has direct relationships with China, being a major oil supplier to the People's Republic. It is affiliated with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the China-Russia counterpoint to NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This well could trigger World War III. And as a footnote there, I should mention that I've been getting a number of harried emails from folks in the Black community complaining that some of their so-called Black friends are wondering why we spend so much time talking about Gaza. And I can only say that if World War III is actually triggered, I doubt if the bombs will act like a black neutron bomb. We recall that was the bomb that left buildings standing as it killed people. I don't think there's a black neutron bomb that leaves black people standing and killing everybody else. I think that this, to go further, is just another form of a kind of militant accommodationism. What I mean by that is accommodationism going back to Booker T. Washington and not struggling on the voting rights front, but then updated through the 1960s Black militancy, whereby you pose as a militant when actually you're accommodating. It's almost like the Michael Jackson moonwalk, where you seem to be going forward when actually you're standing still. In any case, I should also mention, since this is the beginning of the year, that last year when this conflict was ignited, I took time to try to underscore how and why it is that U.S. imperialism is so captivated by Israel. And once again, it goes back to the origins of settler colonialism. It goes back to the reality that in the 1500s, London, England, capitulated to the Protestant sect, and that ignited religious wars with the Spanish powers, Spain in the first instance. Spain barely missed overthrowing the monarchy in 1588 in London. London, which had expelled this Jewish community at the end of the 13th century, had no alternative but to make an alliance with the Jewish diaspora, many of whom had fled Spain because of the Inquisition, whereby you either had to profess Catholicism or be tortured or killed. Interestingly enough, that turned out to be the winning ticket, because what happens is that Protestant England then turns decisively towards the marker of so-called race, away from Spain's marker of religion. Race tends to be the winning ticket in terms of the construction of the new capitalist order. Interestingly enough, as I point out in my 16th century book, in the first few pages, you need go no further than that, many of the tropes that were once used and affixed to the Jewish population, their alleged special odor, the fact that they purportedly had tails, that they could not enter certain professions, that they could not marry across confessional lines, those were shifted to the Black population, and to a greater or lesser degree are still affixed to the Black population. And that alliance between London and the Jewish diaspora continued with the revolting spawn of London, speaking of the United States of America, whereby the United States of America needed every warm European body it could muster in order to corral the indigenous and keep the Africans in line. And so therefore, if you look at the United States in the 19th century, you see Jewish folk playing key roles. I would point in the first place to Judah Benjamin, who was number 2 or 3 in the hierarchy of the Confederate States of America, the slave owners who tried to overthrow the U.S. government. I could point to David Yulee, Y-U-L-E-E. And by the way, Derrick Henry, the star running back of the Tennessee Titans, is from Yulee, Florida, named after this Jewish leader of the Sunshine State, who, of course, was up to his neck in enslavement of Africans. And so this continues to 1947, 1948 with the formation of the State of Israel, and to this very day. I could even, if we had time, and perhaps you will steer me in this direction, talk about how this is having a very noxious impact on the political situation in the United States. I'm sure many in your audience know about what's befallen Claudine Gay, sacked as president of Harvard University, the leading Ivy League university in the United States, a woman who is the daughter of Haitian immigrants. She was seen as insufficiently enthusiastic about the Israeli incursions and war on Gaza, although she did crack down on Palestinian students, but that was not enough. And so she had to walk the plank. And I think we need to really think about this for more than a nanosecond, because with this war, you are going to have increased focus on universities, because universities are seen as a citadel of free thinkers and, strangely enough, a citadel of Marxists, which is obviously an exaggeration. But certainly there are a few who have been able to survive. And obviously the right wing is coming after these real and imagined radicals, hammer and tongue. And that's why some of these real and imagined radicals are beginning to explore places of exile in Bahamas, Bermuda, British Columbia, Caribbean, Africa, etc. Particularly since the Orange Menace, Donald J. Trump, and by the way, we're marking the 3rd anniversary of the attempted overthrow of the U.S. government, preventing the peaceful transfer of power from Trump to Biden in January 6, 2021. And even though it's disturbing in and of itself, the fact that a mob was unleashed that was bent on mayhem. Of course, recall that a noose was constructed on the grounds of the Capitol as the crowd, the mob, was chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." The Trump vice president who wouldn't go along with the plan. And catastrophe was barely averted. And despite that, number one, you have Trump ahead in many polls. And I think that the only fair inference to draw is that the Trump base, 74, 75 million strong, particularly fortified in the Euro-American middle class and working class, they're demanding counter-revolution. I don't think that there's any other conclusion that one can draw. Part of the problem is that many of our friends on the left, they refuse to acknowledge that reality because they have a theory of the case that this working class is actually closet social democrats. But since the Democratic Party is not putting forward a social democratic program, then they vote for the Republicans. Now, that doesn't explain why the black population votes against the Republicans 8-2 and 9-1, although even there, I predict, and it doesn't take an oracle to figure this one out, that if the Trump locomotive continues to gather steam, you'll see many black people trying to jump aboard that train because they don't want to have to go into exile or perhaps be thrown into a dungeon or liquidated. So this is a very dire political situation in the United States of America. We haven't had any, as far as I can tell, any sort of sound analyses of this. And I have been checking in with a number of YouTubers, and these are mostly young black commentators. They're very self-referential. They don't seem to read that many books, but they watch each other's videos and then comment on each other's videos. It can be interesting, but the problem there is that they don't seem to have an analysis of class collaboration, of the class forces in the United States of America. They're all taken with the idea of somehow launching armed struggle. So I hope there will be first in line when my book on armed struggle comes out in mid-2024, where I try to point out some of the frailties of the last attempt to launch armed struggle. Plus, I'm not even sure if they draw the distinction that I draw in my book between armed propaganda. That's what happens in May 1967 when the Black Panther Party entered the Sacramento legislature with arms. That was armed propaganda. And armed self-defense, that's something that's been in play in this country for years. One of the most notorious cases goes back to Dr. Ocean Sweet in Detroit in the 1920s.
Yes.
Who repelled racist invaders who were trying to invade his home. And he accumulated significant support, including from the NAACP. And then there's armed struggle, which is what was attempted on August 7th, 1970, when Jonathan Jackson tried to, well, it's unclear what he was trying to do. At first, it seemed that he was trying to take hostages, including the judge, so that his brother George Jackson could be freed and they could fly away. But subsequently, the line became that they just wanted to go to a radio station and broadcast about the terrible conditions in prisons in San Quentin in the first instance. I'll leave it to you to determine the adequacy of that latter story. But in any case, one more point I'd like to make in terms of the lack of clarity is that the leading Zionist lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, emeritus professor at Harvard Law School, he was quoted in the Wall Street Journal the other day. And this is something that's common to many folks on the left. He said that the appointment of Claudine Gay, the Black woman, daughter of Haitian immigrants, to be president, was an example of, quote, identity politics, unquote. That's a phrase, as I've said, that the left oftentimes affixes to anything involving Black people. Now, what's interesting about that is that he's a devotee of Israel, a state based upon an ethno-religious identity. And if that's not identity politics, I don't know what is. So I would like to suggest to our friends on the left that at least for a decade, if not longer, that they retire the phrase identity politics because it's lost its usefulness. It's now being adapted and adopted by the right wing, just like the previous left term political correctness. So I would hope that our friends on the left would stop handing weapons to the right wing that they then used to flay us.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. You mentioned Dr. Sweet, and I knew of Dr. Sweet because Dr. Sweet in Detroit, who fought against the police, actually brought General Gordon Baker into the world. He was the one that like I say, he slapped General Gordon Baker on his posterior when he I guess when General started the crime. So I know a little bit about Dr. Sweet. And the other thing was the collaborationist with the Zionists. Paul Kagame is notorious, is known for having chummy relationships with Zionism. I would also say that Al Sharpton, and I'm quoting Chairman Omali Ishatella, he refers to Sharpton, Al Sharpton, as Al Charlatan, just quoting him. But Al Sharpton is a big supporter of Israel. And Muhammad Ahmed, and before Muhammad Ahmed, Tony Montero, a guy that you know very well, Tony Montero, a great Marxist. He was a Du Bois scholar. He's very big on Du Bois. He was fired from Malefi Asante, the great Afrocentric scholar. Fired Tony Montero because of him. He was, I guess, too much into Dr. Du Bois and into the white Marxism, white quote unquote white Marxism too much. And as a result of that, Tony Montero was fired along with Max Stanford, Muhammad Ahmed. They lost their employment. And going back to the whole pro-Zionist situation, what were your thoughts on Montero and Muhammad Ahmed when they got fired from Temple University?
Well, it was obviously not a step forward. Now, this also, in the broader sense, comes up in my book, Armed Struggle, ? Panthers and Communists, Black Nationalists and Liberals in Southern California through the 60s and 70s, because one of the key episodes I deal with is what happens on the UCLA campus in January 1969 when Alprentice Mutchie Carter is slain, and John Huggins along with him. And ultimately, an issue was control of the newly installed Black Studies Department. And as it turns out, the man then known as Arthur Smith, eventually known as Malefi Asante, who you just referenced, becomes the head of that department. And that's part of the conclusion that I draw in my study, which is that after the dust clears, you see a lot of Panthers dead, in prison, in exile, and you see certain Black nationalists who are triumphant. I also have receipts, as they say nowadays, with regard to Mr. Karenga's torturing of Black women, which sent him to jail for a number of years. I've noticed that when he's interviewed about this nowadays, he's very good at filibustering. You ask him one question and he just goes on, and by the time he finishes, the hour is up. But it was quite medieval what he did and what his comrades did to these Black women. As I said, this is a family radio show, so I won't go into detail.
Well, I remember, I'll just put this on the record, that when we fought it, well, I was a part of this group called the Self-Determination Committee, which was formed by Robert Brock. And we sued the United States government. Well, he sued, and I had signed on to it for refusing to perform, to go to Vietnam. And one of the people, I won't even mention his name, was my co-defendant, was a member of the US organization, the United Slaves, and they made a deal with the state. And he's still walking around Los Angeles, and I had to get in the whirlwind and get out of town. And I was convicted of draft evasion and given 5 years in prison and fined $5,000. And like I say, the person is with Ron Karenga's organization. He never left LA. Still living.
There you have it.
And question. Well, let me say this before I bring Melinda in. I'm looking at Larry Ham has a show on WPFW, and the name of the radio show is Jazz and Justice Radio, 89.3 FM, and they're dealing with their show today is Free Palestine. So I think that's part of your hand, wouldn't you say?
Right on. Yeah. I can't wait to go on that show. And speaking of Melinda, you should brief the audience about the new website, and also brief the audience as to whether or not our CKLN programs going back to the 1990s will be on the website.
Yes, thanks for introducing that. Yes, basically we launched our website. So we are live on the www.diasporicmusic.com. All our platforms are going to be there. So we're currently on on SoundCloud, we're on Mixcloud, the Horne Report's on YouTube, but also on Activist News Network. And our goal is to sort of dive into the archives and slowly digitizing, and both See You in the Whirlwind, which is Norman's archives of his journey as a draft resistor, and then also the CKLN Saturday Morning Live archive, which was formerly on CKLN from, I don't know, Norman, when did you start Saturday Morning Live? When was the first show?
I believe it was, I think we started around the event around Bob Marley, I believe, but Saturday Morning Live came as a result of, it was a sister of Indian origin who was born in Uganda, Poonam Khosla. They had a show called Saturday. I think I took the name from them because Saturday Morning Live is a takeoff on Saturday Night Live. And Saturday Night Live, which was started by a Canadian guy, Lorne Michaels, I think his name is, they took the name, they took that and borrowed from that and started Saturday Morning Live. And I took over the show, and then yeah, right, and then I took it over. Yeah, when I say I took it over, I became the producer host, and then CKLN was we were run out of off the air, so on and so forth. So we kept the name.
Yes. And for people who don't know, who are, basically don't know the show, Diasporic Music is kind of a combination of Saturday Morning Live and then, Norman's music show that he had ongoing with Hoover Radio. And the reason why we didn't have the capacity to continue a 3-hour call-in show online. Right. So that's why we kind of combined it. And here we are, we're in Diasporic Music. So they all have, so the hope of the archives is to sort of document and archive that history. So we're starting at the starting line, and you can go to the website and you can follow those two blogs and that journey as we embark on digitizing that history kind of thing. So, yeah.
And Dr. Horne, let me ask you the question. We started on CKLN. At the first time we came together, I was Samori Marksman, the Saint Samori Marksman out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He was the person, I had met you before, but he was a person that suggested that I link up with you. And he put us together, if I remember correctly.
Well, yeah, I think you do. Samora, of course, was the late program director at WBAI, Pacifica Radio in New York City, and a grand intellectual. And I recall first visiting Toronto when we had the National Conference of Black Lawyers annual meeting in your fair city. And that was in the mid-1980s, if I'm not mistaken. And in the mid-1980s, CKLN and Saturday Morning Live was already afloat, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know. I think the first time I remember seeing you, you had on a bow tie, you had a mustache, you looked like one of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's followers at that time. You had the mustache and the bow tie, and that might even been before that, though, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know the Roaches very well. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I wanted to ask you, because time is expiring, about the Toronto Raptors getting rid of OG, sending him to the Knicks. My own analysis of that trade is that I think that you got a real winner with regard to Quickly. I've been following his career. He's the steal of that trade. I don't know how he's been doing with the Raptors. Have you been following him?
Very good, very good, very good. Tearing the place up.
Now you're
doing quite well.
Maple Leafer Barrett. I'm not so sure about him.
Oh yeah, he's I think his Jamaican background. His father was a baller, big time Canadian on the Canadian team, and Barrett is a baller too. I think he's going to be all right. But I think this. What am I saying? I think first of all, I'm not an expert on basketball by any stretch of the imagination, but Barrett can hold his own. He can hold his own, and I think Masai Ujiri. I have some questions about his politics, but in terms of his basketball skills, I think he's a genius on that question. And I think, Nigeria is a big supporter of Paul Kagame, and he's buddy with Obama, so on and so forth. Takes a kind of a right wing position politically, but when it comes to basketball, I think he's one of the baddest, and he's one of the baddest in the good sense in the game, from what I can see.
And of course, he's I don't know what his exact title is, but he operates like a chief executive of the Toronto Raptors basketball team. And right. OG, who was sent from the Raptors to New York, he's of course of Nigerian ancestry, although he spent a lot of time in Missouri, Jefferson City, Missouri, because his father was a professor.
I didn't know that.
At Lincoln University, the historically black school in Jefferson City, which, by the way, my late sister attended and graduated from Lincoln University, that historically black school in Missouri, Jefferson City.
Is OG, do you know if he is Igbo or Yoruba? Which for?
I really don't know, and I don't know by his surname either.
He's kind of doing, from what I've been seeing, he's doing quite well as with the Knicks, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I right now the scuttlebutt is that the Knicks got the best of the trade. But I think that's premature because I think Quickly, I've been following his career. He's the only reason he got traded is that Brunson is turning into a top 5 point guard for the Knicks, and Quickly was playing behind Brunson. And so Knicks management figured that they could get a good player by trading him to the Raptors and getting OG back. And I think this might be the trade that benefits both teams.
Right. So my comrade, we have we went overtime. Thank you for that. I know you have other work. Melinda, I would like to thank. First of all, I would like to thank Lisa Watson for keeping us on sounding good. You know, despite my mumbling from time to time. And Melinda Francis, I would like to thank you for putting our tribute to Mr. Sidney Portier together. And thanks to Tien and everyone who helped put this show together. And we will see everyone in the whirlwind. And take care of yourself, Dr. Gerald Horne.
Good luck.